brief to that.
You may be seated. Honorable members, before we proceed with today's business, I wish to announce that the vacancies which occurred in the National Assembly owing to the resignation of Mrs. D. Ngwenya and P. Sindane have been filled with effect from the 10th of December 2021 by the nominations of Ms. P. Marais and Mr. A. Matumba, respectively. The vacancies which occurred owing to the passing away of Mr. D. M. Nkosi has been filled by the nomination of Mr. C. N. Malimaja, with effect from the 25th of January 2022. The vacancy which occurred owing to the resignation of Ms. S. N. August has been filled by the nomination of Mr. B. N. Heron, with effect from the 2nd of February. Lastly, the vacancy which occurred owing to the passing away of Mr. S. M. N. Ngumalo has been filled by the nomination of Mr. S. S. Zondo, with effect from the 8th of February 2022. The members have made and subscribed the oath and affirmation in the Speaker's office. I welcome you, honorable members. Honorable members, I wish to remind you that in the interest of safety for all present in the chamber, please keep your mask on and sit in your designated area. Thank you. The Secretary will read the first to second orders of the day together.
Introduction of the Appropriation Bill and tabling of the Division of Revenue Bill. Introduction of the second Adjustments Appropriation Bill.
The Honorable, the Minister of Finance.
Honorable Speaker, His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, His Excellency, the Deputy President, Mr. David Mabuza, Cabinet colleagues, members of the Executive Committee for Finance in the provinces. I have got the honor of having a guest, the Minister of Finance of the Democratic Republic of Congo, who is around us today. The Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, fellow South Africans. It's my honor and privilege to table before this House the 2022 national budget. The 2022 Division of Revenue Bill, the 2022 Appropriation Bill, the second Adjustment Appropriation 2021-2022 Financial Year Bill, the estimate of national expenditure, the 2022 budget review, and this budget speech. Madam Speaker, we stand here galvanized by the State of the Nation address delivered by His Excellency, President Cyril Ramaphosa. The President reminded us that as we face steep and daunting challenges like we have done in the past, we will overcome. To do so, we need to strike a critical balance between saving lives and livelihoods while supporting inclusive growth. The budget presents this balance. Our economic recovery has been uneven and risks remain high. We must proceed with caution. In the 2021 medium-term budget policy statement, we committed ourselves to charting a course towards growth and fiscal sustainability. This budget reassets this commitment. It narrows the budget deficit and stabilizes debt. It also extends income and employment support to the most vulnerable, addresses service delivery shortcomings, and provides tax relief. We'll come back in a moment to those areas. However, these interventions cannot replace the structural changes our economy needs. Difficult and necessary trade-offs are required. The world economy is expected to grow by 4.4% this year. This is lower than 4.9% we anticipated at the time of tabling the medium-term budget policy statement. The Omicron variant of the coronavirus caused many countries to impose restrictions to manage its spread. In addition, continued imbalances in global value chains have limited pace of the world economic recovery. The South African economy has not been insulated from these global developments. We have revised our economic growth estimate for 2021 to 4.8%, from 51% at the time of the tabling of the medium-term budget policy statement. This revision reflects, Madam Speaker, a combination of the impact of changes in the global environment along with our own unique challenges. Commodity prices, which have supported our economic recovery, slowed in the second half of 2021. Also, violent unrest in July and restrictions imposed to manage the third wave of COVID-19 further eroded the gains we made in the first half of the year. Industrial action in the manufacturing sector, particularly the steel sector, also the re-emergence of load shedding also slowed the pace of recovery. The real GDP growth of 2.1% is projected for the 2022, which is an upward revision from what we said at the time of the medium-term budget policy statement. Over the next 2 years, GDP growth is expected to average about 1.8%. Tax collections since the time of the medium-term budget policy statement have been much stronger than expected. We now estimate revenue for 2021-22 to be 1.55 trillion. This is 62 billion higher than our estimate from the 4 months ago, and 182 billion higher than the estimate from the last year's budget. This follows a shortfall in the previous year of 176 billion when compared to 2020 budget forecast. This positive surprise has come mainly from the mining sector due to higher commodity prices. The improved revenue performance is not a reflection of an improvement in the capacity of our economy. As such, we cannot plan permanent expenditures on the basis of short-term increases in commodity prices. To be clear, any permanent increases in spending should be financed in a way that does not worsen the fiscal deficit. We have also seen higher revenues from other sectors and other tax instruments, such as personal income tax and value-added tax. Madam Speaker, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the establishment of the South African Revenue Services. SARS plays a vital role in the economy, and we congratulate them on this momentous occasion. We also welcome the current modernization of its infrastructure at border posts such as Beit Bridge to facilitate greater trade. Honourable members, more than 308 billion rand has been directed towards bailing out failing state institution companies. Since 2013, frontline services and infrastructure reduced by 256 billion rand. In this budget, we are shifting from this trend and are restoring our focus on the 4 core functions of government. We're also on course to close key fiscal imbalances and restore the health of our public finances. Our debt burden remains a matter of serious concern. This year, government debt has reached 4.3 trillion and projected to rise to 5.4 trillion over the medium term. This huge sum is owed to lenders domestically and around the world. It incurs large debt service costs, averaging 330 billion rand annually over the medium term. These costs are larger than spending on each of the health, police, or basic education. For this reason, to support the economic recovery, in this budget, we are reducing the fiscal deficit and stabilizing debt. The consolidated budget deficit is projected to narrow from 5.7% of GDP in the fiscal year 2021 to 2022 to 4.2% of GDP by 24-25. We now expect to realize a primary fiscal balance where revenue exceeds non-interest expenditure by 2023-24. The debt ratio will stabilize at about 75% of GDP by 24-25, and this is 3% points lower than we had projected when we tabled the medium-term budget policy statement. Can you see all of these things are positive? This is also the first time since 2015 that we are reducing the borrowing requirement using some of the extra revenue we have collected. The borrowing requirements decreased by 135.8 billion this year, and a total of 1.5 billion over the next 2 years. Though this fiscal outlook has improved, it is subject to significant risk. These include, amongst others, slow global and domestic economic growth, calls for permanent increase in social spending that exceeds available resources, pressures from public service wage bill, and continued request for financial support from financial distressed state-owned enterprises. We need to stay vigilant and mitigate the risk where possible. In the upcoming period, we'll do more to work to strengthen fiscal anchors. We'll also reduce the continual demands on South Africa's limited public resources from state-owned companies. For this reason, state-owned companies need to develop and implement sustainable turnaround plans. The future of state-owned companies is under consideration by the Presidential State-Owned Enterprise Council. Their future will be informed by the value they create and whether they can be run as sustainable entities without bailouts from the fiscus. Some state-owned companies will be retained while others will be rationalized or consolidated. To reduce this continued demands on South Africa's public resources, the National Treasury will outline the criteria for government funding of state-owned companies during the upcoming financial year. Tough love. We are aware that Eskom's debt situation remains a concern for its creditors and our investors alike. is a major concern. Government continues to support Eskom to remain financially sustainable during this transition. To date, Eskom has been provided with 136 billion to pay off its debt, with a further 88 billion rand until 2025-26. We acknowledge, however, that Eskom is faced with a large amount of debt that remains a challenge to service without assistance. What that means, if I may just explain, people have said, you know, if we dissect Eskom's debt, there's a component of it which they call distressed debt. Whatever Eskom can do, it can't be able to fund it. One or the other, we've got to create some magic within the fiscus to deal with that. I just wanted to explain that portion to be more explicit. The National Treasury is working on a sustainable solution to deal with Eskom's debt in a manner that is equitable and fair to all stakeholders. Any solution will be contingent on continued progress to reform South Africa's electricity sector and Eskom's own progress on its turnaround plan and its restructuring. We expect Eskom to take further steps towards cost containment, conclude the sale of assets, and implement operational improvement to enhance the reliability of electricity supply. The outcome of this work, which is legally and technically complex, will be announced within the next financial year. Madam Speaker, we have taken action to reform the electricity sector. This encompasses the lifting of restoration threshold for embedded generation to 100 megawatts. It also includes amendments to the Electricity Regulation Act of 2006 and the new generation projects that are coming online over the next few years. These interventions demonstrate the commitment of this government to solve South Africa's electricity supply challenges. Madam Speaker, we have had more than a decade of economic stagnation. All true sustained economic growth Only through sustained economic growth can South Africa create enough jobs to reduce poverty and inequality, enabling us to reach our goal of better life for all. The economic reconstruction and recovery program remains essential to growth. We are accelerating implementation of critical structural reforms contained in the economic recovery and reconstruction program, particularly electricity, rail, ports, telecommunication. To complement these interventions, Madam Speaker, we will accelerate infrastructure investment, which is a backbone of a thriving economy. The National Treasury will be implementing the results of recently completed review of the public-private partnership framework. We aim to create centers of excellence for PPPs and other blended finance projects. The Center of Excellence will be established with direct treasury oversight. It will be a direct interface with private financial institutions for investment in critical government infrastructure programs. We will also work with other national departments in the provinces of the Eastern Cape and Northern Cape to pilot a revised approach to infrastructure delivery. If I may pause here, you will recall this is a message which came in the State of the Nation address. And we're following through on that message and giving content to it. This approach will include innovative financing and delivery mechanisms as announced by the President in the State of the Nation address. Regarding the Mzimvubu Dam, we are at an advanced stage of resolving the project's issues. We will make further announcements on this in the medium-term budget policy statement. In October, I'll table amendments through the 2022 Division of Revenue Amendment Bill to enable provinces to pledge their infrastructure grants to leverage more financing to fast-track the rollout of infrastructure. Mr. President, in the State of the Nation address, you spoke about the importance of catalytic and blended finance projects. These projects have the potential to crowd in private investor for bulk infrastructure. As we upgrade roads, bridges, water, sewer transport, schools infrastructure, hospitals and clinics, the aim is to unlock higher levels of employment for those involved in projects. I'm pleased to inform this House that a provincial allocation is set aside in this budget for 17.5 billion over the medium term for infrastructure catalytic projects. We look forward to engaging with specific proposals in this regard. Value for money and quality of delivery is a top priority in the development of the project pipeline. To support businesses in distress owing to COVID-19 pandemic, a new business bounce back scheme will be launched using the mechanism which will be introduced sequentially. Firstly, small business loans guarantees of 15 billion rand will be facilitated through the participating banks, development finance and development finance institutions. This will allow access to qualifying non-bank small and medium loan providers. Government will partner with loan providers by underwriting the first 20% of loss for banks and other eligible small and medium loan providers. The eligibility criteria, including the requirement for collateral, has been loosened. This mechanism will be launched and operational next month. Secondly, by April this year, we will indeed intend to introduce a business equity-linked loan guarantee support scheme. We intend to bring the total support package through the bounce back scheme to 20 billion rand. The equity support mechanism of this scheme will be facilitated through the DFIs. It will also be available to qualifying non-bank small and medium finance providers. Details of the terms of the equity-linked guarantee mechanism will be provided soon. Over the medium term, 76 billion rand is allocated for job creation programs. In this budget, additional 18.4 billion is made available for the Presidential Employment Initiative. Madam Speaker, we do not aspire to be below 2% growth economy. We are capable of much more. In this regard, we are refining proposal for an expanded reform agenda to shift our economy towards a higher growth trajectory. In this budget, we are taking steps to support education, health, the fight against crime and corruption, and to improve capital investment, among others. Over the next 3 years, we allocate 3.3 trillion to the social wage to support vulnerable and low-income households. This is approximately 60% of the non-interest spending. We've prioritized spending on the following key areas. In 2017, government announced a policy for free higher education. We are announcing an additional allocation of 32 billion rand for financial support to current bursary holders and first-year students under the National Education Finance Aid Scheme. Any further shortfalls will be funded from within the baseline of the Department of Education. Madam Speaker, at the height of the COVID-19, our teachers had to make tremendous sacrifices to ensure that our children get educated. Equally, our healthcare workers were among those that were the last and only line of defense against the pandemic. In this budget, we are adding 24.6 billion for provincial education department to address the shortfalls in the compensation of teachers. An additional 15.6 billion is allocated to provincial health departments to support their continued response to COVID-19 and to bridge shortfalls in essential goods and services. 3.3 billion is allocated to absorb medical interns and community service doctors. 87.7 billion is added to the police budget. The department is allocated 1 billion to implement personnel reforms, and another 800 million may be available in the following year, subject to satisfactory progress. That's the Department of Defense. We are also strengthening the resources of the justice system and our courts. In this regard, the budget of the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development is increased by 1.1 billion, while the Office of the Chief Justice received an additional 39.9 million. The South African National Road Agency receives an additional 9.9 billion for maintaining the non-toll road network. Over and above this, the budget facility for infrastructure has approved funding for several water projects. 2.1 billion is allocated for raising the wall of the Klein Willem Dam. The Lipile water border is allocated 1.4 billion for the Olifantsfontein Ebenezer plants. The Umgeni Water Board is allocated 813 million for the Lower Umkomazi Water Supply Chain Scheme. I'm pleased to announce that the project to maintain 6 border posts, including Beit Bridge, is at an advanced stage of preparation. Feasibility studies have been completed, and a request for proposal will be issued in March 2022. Madam Speaker, we watch in outrage and sadness as flames devour the buildings in which our Constitution was born. I'm gratified to learn of the enthusiasm of South Africans who want to be part of rebuilding Parliament. I'm looking forward to truly a national effort for this. The Department of Social Development will receive the largest allocation of 58.6 billion over the medium term for the following. First, to initiate a new extended child support grant for double orphans. This is to encourage the care of orphans within families rather than foster care. Second, to provide inflationary increases to permanent social grants. For 2022-23 fiscal year, the old age, war veterans, disability, and care dependence grants will increase by 90 rand in October. The foster care and child support grants will increase by a once-off 20 rand in April. Thirdly, 44 billion rand is allocated for a 12-month extension of the 350 social relief grant, total distress grant. Honourable members, the social relief distress grant was introduced in 2020-21 as a temporary relief measure in view of the plight of those who have lost economic opportunities and were adversely affected during the worst periods of the pandemic. These emergency grants added to the country's already extensive social safety net. South Africa now pays grants to more than 46% of the population. Finally, the 2022-23 contingency reserve is increased by a 5 billion rand. This provides for an amount already approved in the previous budget for the Land Bank to be paid in the new financial year. We remain committed, if I may come back to the Land Bank issue, precisely because of the difficulties in settling with the lenders on time. We couldn't make the transfer during this financial year. Progress is being made in settling with the lenders, and we think by the beginning of the financial year, we'll make progress, and we're making that 5 billion available for the next financial year. We remain committed to controlling those parts of the budget that are permanent in nature, including by arresting historical rapid increase in the public sector wage bill. Compensation spending will increase marginally from 665.1 billion in 2021-22 to 702 billion in 24-25, at an average annual rate of increase 1.8%. As indicated in 2021 medium-term budget policy statement, we have allocated additional funding of 20.5 billion rand in 2022-23 to meet the cost of implications of the 2021 Public Service Wage Agreement. A public sector labor summit is scheduled to take place as from the 28th to the 31st of March. This summit is an important opportunity for stakeholders to engage in building sustainable public services and remuneration guidelines. Basic municipal services require more support, especially for the poor. To address this, 28.9 billion is added to the local government's equitable share. Madam Speaker, we are making these allocations to uplift and provide services to our people. These funds must be used for the purpose they are meant for. Currently, 175 out of the 257 municipalities are in financial distress. We stand ready to work with Parliament and all oversight bodies to hold municipalities accountable for delivery of these services. At the same time, our municipalities and other institutions cannot survive if they do not receive payment from those who consume their services. We urge our people and government departments to pay their municipality bills. Municipalities are also required to improve their service delivery mechanism and to ensure that billing systems are fair and efficient. Madam Speaker, corruption is a major blight in our country. It has lowered our economic growth potential, made us physically more vulnerable, and severely weakened the capacity of the state. Accounting officers need to ensure that their procurement processes have integrity, provide value for money, and are free from interference from political people like me. We also need to be clear on what we are fighting. We must differentiate between corruption and minor transgressions and the rules of policy or rules of policy prescribed that are audited or as irregular expenditure. The National Treasury is engaging with Auditor General to continue to ensure transparent disclosures of minor transgression, but outside the financial audit process. As I indicated last year, the public procurement bill will be tabled before this Parliament. In the light of the current Constitutional Court judgment on the preferential procurement regulations and the first Zondo Commission report highlighted abuses in state procurement, we are revising the bill to take account of these developments. We are also responding formally to the Zondo Commission report. In the meantime, we must take bold steps to improve state capacity and reduce the scope of procurement corruption. Working with SARS, the Investigative Directorate in the Office of National Director of Public Prosecution has brought charges against company director and a Gupta associate involved in the corrupt Estina dairy project. This is on charges of fraudulent VAT refund claims under declaration of plant and equipment expenses, exchange control violations. SARS is also recovering the fraudulent refunds that were claimed. We're also dealing with illicit trade. Just yesterday, SARS conducted a search and seizure operation. This operation uncovered another consignment of illegal tobacco products, bringing in the total of value of illicit tobacco seized during the pandemic to over 350 million. Overall, SARS has raised assessment of 18 billion additional duties, cancelled the trading licenses of 3 operators, liquidated 1 operator, and referred 18 cases for criminal prosecution. Finally, we are addressing the weaknesses in fighting fraud and money laundering identified in our recent mutual evaluation or our anti-monetary laundering system by what is called the Financial Action Task Force. what is called FAT. Madam Speaker, households and businesses are still under financial... No, it's how it is spelled. Households are still under financial pressure and are coping with higher obligations, the effects of COVID-19 and increased fuel prices. Now is not the time to increase taxes and put the recovery at risk. Accordingly, we have decided to keep money in the pockets of South Africans. This budget includes a 5.2 billion in tax relief to help support the economic recovery, provide some receipt for fuel tax increases, and boost incentive for youth employment. Madam Speaker, our tax proposal for 2022-23 are as follows. The personal income tax bracket and rebates will be adjusted by 4.5% in line with inflation. The adjustment will mean that the annual tax-free threshold for a person under the age of 65 will increase from 87,300 to 91,250. What in practice, Tatumandash, it means tiqala ukukutaxa xa ufikele ku-9 xa annual salary yakho ingaphansi ko-91,000 ndikutax. Tsho loo nto ke mntana. Yena ndizamteka. Medical tax credits will increase from 332 to 347 rand per month for first two members, and from 224 to 234 per month for additional members. The employment tax incentives will be expanded through a 50% increase in the maximum monthly value to 1,500. I encourage small and medium firms to take up this incentive. We anticipate that the expansion will provide additional support worth of 2.2 billion rand. In 2021, the inland petrol price breached 20 rand per litre. The high price has put pressure on the cost of transport, food and other goods and services. To provide some relief to households, no increases will be made to this general fuel levy and petrol diesel for the 2023. This will provide a tax relief of 3.5%. A good limit in speech. Never be generous. So that's 3.5 billion to South Africans. There will also be no increase in the, but before stepping the fuel increase, a sentence I've not inserted here. I've had discussion with the Minister of Mineral and Energy. We are in agreement. We've set up teams. The intention is to review the fuel price, its structure moving forward. Because the intention is to make sure that we can have a petrol price which is competitive for this economy. So our teams will make this and will make the announcement in due course. There will also be no increases in the road accident fund. No increase again. There is no increase on the accident levy. I've made the point between myself and Minister Mandasha to agree on the review of all aspects of the fuel price is needed. Our team have already begun to engage on this critical work. Restructuring the corporate income tax system is an important part of our efforts to create a conducive environment to business to grow, increase investment, and employ more people. As announced in the 2021 budget, the corporate income tax rate will be reduced from 28% to 27% for companies with a years of assessment ending on or after the 31st of March 2023. This will be complemented by a base broadening measure to ensure that there's no negative impact on revenue. Excise duties on alcohol and tobacco will unfortunately increase by between 4.5 and 6%. The increase means that as from today, at 340 millimeter can of beer or cider will cost 11 cents more. A 750 bottle of wine will be 7 cents more expensive. A bottle of sparkling wine will cost an additional 76 cents. A bottle of spirit, whiskey, asbahlanga, the 4.83, 4.83 cents. A packet of cigarettes will cost an additional R1.03. 25 grams of puffed tobacco will cost an extra 37 cents. 23 grams of cigar will be, no cigar to Masisiti. Sipezu, R6.77 more expensive. Government also proposes introducing a new tax on vaping products of at least 290 per milliliter from 1st of January 2023. The rationale for that is not part of the tax system now. We've got to go through the processes required by law of consultations and all of the. I would have preferred to introduce it today. A new tax will also be introduced on beer powders. After 3 years of no changes, the health promotion levy will be increased by R2.31 per gram of sugar. Madam Speaker, the structure of the economy will need to change to adapt to the needs of addressing climate change. As we reduce emissions, communities must not be left behind as production shifts to greener solutions. There are opportunities to access international finance to help pay for this just transition. The National Treasury is working with the new head of Presidential Climate Finance Task Scheme on accessing these resources. Be transparent so early. I don't know about transparent, but be transparent before need for man. I don't know how does that work. The carbon tax is the main mechanism to ensure that we lower our greenhouse emissions. The carbon tax rate will increase from 134 to 144 rand, effective from the 1st of January 2022. As required by legislation, the carbon fuel levy will increase by 1 cent to 9 cents per litre for petrol and 10 cents per litre for diesel from 6th of April 2022. The first phase of the carbon tax with substantial allowances and electricity price neutrality will be extended to 31st December 2025. However, in line with our commitments at COP26, the carbon tax rate will be progressively increased every year to reach $20 per ton. In the second phase, from 2026 onwards, the carbon tax rate will have larger annual increase to reach at least $30 by 2030, and the allowance will rapidly fall away. As the allowances fall away, we urge all our companies that have not already done so to develop plans to progressively reduce their emissions over the next 10 years. Otherwise, they will face not only my tax, but have difficulty in exports. Our exporters will face overseas border taxes for carbon-intensive goods such as iron ore and steel, which will reduce their competitiveness. Madam Speaker, you will note that we have not increased taxes in the major revenue-generating categories such as personal income tax, VAT, and general fuel levy. We have reduced the corporate tax rate and broadened the tax base. However, let me restate my earlier caution that if there are permanent expenditure increases in the coming years, we have no choice but to revisit. We will have to look at increasing some of the taxes. Madam Speaker, in these trying times, and without compromising our ability to collect revenue, we've managed through these tax proposals to keep money in the pockets of South Africans and to create conditions for greater investment in the economy. Just before declaring retirement, somebody will say, oh, you said you have got 182 billion rand last year. You were transparent, you yenzeni. Niqimba nithe ngani tax, disebenza yona la mali. That's why we're not increasing taxes. We can't say when you get such big amounts of money and so on, and we're transferring that and putting money into your pockets. That's what we have done. Transparent. Then also Fundani budget review helps you on tax 1, chapter 4, on debt, chapter 7. So let me go. Retirement funds play a critical role in channeling savings into productive investment. There's been this outcry about Regulation 28 of the Pension Funds Act, which sets out criteria through which these funds may make investment. After consultation, changes have been proposed to these regulations to enable greater investment in infrastructure by the funds. After consultation again of these changes, the amendments will be gazetted next month. Regulation 28. Next month in the Gazette, March. Government has also proposed a fundamental restructuring of the retirement system for individuals to allow for greater preservation and partial access to funds through what they call a two-pot system. Part of this proposal includes the possibility of short-term access, which would be depend on the approval by trustees of each fund. Let me just explain this thing. There's a Utito promised us, are you going to give us? No, I can't give you money from your own pension fund. Your own pension fund has got its own trustees. The decision to take money out of the fund must be a decision of a trustee. The only thing I'm going to do as the Minister of Finance is to create a conducive environment for trustees to make that decision if they think the fund is capable of doing so. But the Minister of Finance, what must copy man and struggle in it? No. Think a punting a bail. No. Your trustees must make the decision. I will make the law which make it possible for the trustees to make the decision, not me. Consultations are proceeding following the release of the discussion paper last year, and the draft legislation on these amendments will be published for comment in the middle of the year. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate our commitment to reconstruction and recovery of our economy, saving lives and restoring livelihoods, as well as securing a long-term prosperity of our nation. It is often said that I believe that this applies to circumstances under which we deliver this budget. You won't realize the distance we have walked until you look around and realize how far you have been. We have been on this journey for a long time, and we are still having long distances to walk before reaching our goal. Madam Speaker, I take this opportunity to thank the President and Deputy President for their leadership and guidance. Thank my Deputy, Dr. Masondo, for his support. The Treasury team, led by the Director General, who's finishing 23 years this year, Dondo. Their task, which is team, and I express my thanks to them. My sincere gratitude also goes to the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Edward Kwesma, and the hard work of SARS. Many thanks to the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Mr. Leshisa Kganyago, and staff of the bank. Let me also thank my colleagues in the Ministers' Committee on Budget and the Budget Council and the MSs for Finance for various provinces who have shared the load and tough decisions that have made in this current environment. Similarly, my parliamentary committee members of Finance and Appropriation, I express my sincere appreciation. Even when I mess up, they always call me and bring me to life. Finally, we tribute to millions of South Africans who have resilience and courage during these times of pandemic and economic hardship, and is an inspiration for all of us. No, andikwazi ungabuleli family yami nonkosikazi wami lungincebisa kahle ha. I have got to thank umamfazi wami umamchawe bana ndiluka I look nice. With those few words, Madam Speaker, thank you very much.
I thank the Honorable
You must present the bill.
Minister.
Speaker,
Yes, Honorable Member.
so the standard practice is that, I don't know whether we must stand up or speak sitting down. The standard practice is that when a Minister of Finance finishes the budget speech, must introduce the bills, which must be deliberated and then refer them to the committee. He did not do so.
Honorable.
He has not done so, so he's amateurish. He must go back and table the bills. He must go and table the bills there. We didn't hear him.
Order. Take your seat, Honorable Mantashe. Take your seat. Take your seat, please. Thank you very much. Honorable Shivambu, you may have missed this right at the beginning of his speech. The Honorable Minister did table the documents.
You must do it again.
I wish to protect him now. Thank you very much, honorable members. The papers tabled by the minister will be referred to the relevant committee. That concludes the business for the day. The House is adjourned.
Long live the Speaker!
Thank you.
Well, that was the finance speech by the finance minister. Of course, we're going to be taking political reactions from the political parties right here in the precinct. First up is ACDP Chief Whip, Mr. Steve Swart. Your take on the minister's speech?
Well, the minister said all the right things, and he will definitely placate investors and business confidence. The tax windfall of 180 billion rand has, as we've said in the past, to be used for fiscal consolidation, to reduce our public debt, and that he is doing partially, and of course to address social needs like the funding for the extension of the COVID-19 distress relief, which we support, and then for economic growth. We are so pleased, and I'm sure our viewers are pleased, the tax rates are not increasing, the fuel levy is not increasing, the RAF fund is not increasing, but there are still significant fiscal risks that the minister did point out, and that is slow economic growth. So we've got to stimulate economic growth for job creation and to increase our tax base. But all in all, I think the budget will be well received by many people in South Africa.
Steve Swart, thank you so much. He's from the ACDP, giving us his party's perspective. For more reactions, Nombu is standing by.
Thanks very much for coming to us after the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, has delivered his maiden speech. A very interesting one indeed. No increase in personal income taxes, no increase in the road road levy, nor in the RAF levy. So this is obviously good news for motorists who are really worried about the fact that the price of petrol and other fuels are going up. Obviously, because of a factor, of course, of higher international oil prices. I do apologize, I'm slightly distracted by the various communication. But basically, this is very good news. And one other piece of news that came out, obviously, is the fact that corporate tax is down by 1 percentage point. So that will be good for corporates. To join me more, I am now joined, of course, by I do forget her name, but she'll introduce herself and then we'll proceed. Please introduce yourself.
I am Fatani Banda, the SAB Economist and Excise Specialist. And yes, good to speak to you post the budget.
So a couple of good things. The excise duty, which you were campaigning to be stabilized, or where you wanted a little bit of easing by the Finance Minister, it was raised in line with inflation. And on top of that, there's this news of the corporate tax as well. That has come down by 1 percentage point. Your reaction?
Well, first off, we're very encouraged by the fact that the government has done a better job at nuancing the excise adjustment. It has provided a differentiated excise adjustment between 4.5% and 6.5%. So across all alcohol categories, there is a different increase in excise. For the beer industry and for SAB, we are encouraged by the 5.5% increase. It is less than last year, and it is closer to inflation, and it is saying for us that the government is recognizing that out of policy excise adjustments are not the way to go. We are cognizant of the corporate income tax adjustment lower, but we are still in the space of thinking that recovery should still be on the table, and more tax relief by way of small, medium and micro brewers should still be on the table for the beer industry. But overall, we are encouraged by the fact that the government has heard us and has heard our pleas towards keeping excise at a reasonable level in terms of its adjustment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Banda. We're going to leave it there. We're speaking to a slew of people now, but thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.
Let me hand over now to Bulelani Philip.
Thank you so much again, Nombu. Of course, more political reactions here outside the Good Hope Chamber. I'm bringing into the conversation now Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi from the IFP. Firstly, coming into this budget speech, you were quite confident or quite lamenting that there should be no bailouts for state-owned companies. You must be relieved about that announcement from the Finance Minister.
Yes, very much so. We are released, and to a greater extent, this speech budget was very much balanced, because the minister actually talked to a number of things that we expected as the IFP, the issue of infrastructure, infrastructure, the allocation there, and also the increase in local government, which we have been saying that all developments takes place in the locality there. So we are very happy. We think that this is the most welcome budget speech going forward. And the fact that the President in his SONA emphasized the issue of trying to deal decisively with corruption, and more money gets allocated to state, to law enforcement agencies. So we are happy as the IP to say at least the minister tried to balance under circumstance.
All right, thank you so much, Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi from the IFP. Now in the picture is the leader of the FF Plus, Dr. Peter Groenewald. Your take on the issue of debt stabilization and the issue of reining in expenditure by government?
Well, if we look at the expenditure and the income, we are still worried about the deficit in the first place and overall the government debt. We must remember that the debt at this moment is 4.3 trillion rand, and over the medium term it's going to rise to 5.4 trillion, giving us an annual service cost of 330 billion. That gives you 90 million rand a day. So that is worrying. And we're also becoming a welfare state where 46% of the population is dependent on social grants, as what the minister has said. Although we welcome the fact that there is, from the government side, recognition that ordinary citizens can only afford so much. So the no increase in the fuel levy, as well as the road accident fund is welcome, as well as the fact that a 1% decrease for company tax. We think that is a way to start encouraging companies to expand their businesses in South Africa. So it's a well-balanced budget in the circumstances, although there are still red lights flickering.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Peter Groenewald from the FF Plus. Coming to the conversation now is the Chief Whip of the United Democratic Movement, Mr. Ngabayozi Mkhwanka. The Finance Minister talking a lot of things. I know that one of the passionate points that we have is around the issue of debt stabilization. Has this struck the right chords for you as the UDM?
Well, let's give credit where it's due. I think the budget was not too bad, not too shabby. I think the minister touched on all the relevant and the most important points, including the issue of debt stabilization and the fact that some of the revenue that was generated, the 182 billion rands, will be used towards that. Obviously, it's a concern that a government can be able to have its focus wrong to the point where they have a revenue of 182 billion rands. But the good thing is that it's being used to make sure that, for an example, that we don't pay tax. The fact that there's going to be no fuel levy increase is a plus. But obviously, as a Social Democratic Party, we'll always have an issue with the fact that they've gone ahead and decided to reduce the corporate income tax rate from 28% to 27%. But look, overall, the minister mentioned and touched on all the right points, but I'm not too sure if the government has a comprehensive plan for the recovery of SOEs. I'm not too sure if they have actually put a plan forward here to talk about infrastructure-led growth and how that is going to be done over the next couple of years, especially when the private sector continues with its investment, where it does not invest in the economy. And you need the private sector really to invest in the economy in order to improve gross capital formation.
All right, Mr. Ngabayozi Mkhwanka from the UDM, thank you so much for your time. Coming to here now is the president of Al Jama, Mr. Mohammed Khanif Hendricks. For you, you've been advocating the issue of raising the social net for the poor. Did the minister actually strike the right chords in that regard?
Look, the minister gave an extra 90 rand for pensioners, and that must be welcome. But we expected more. But I can understand that the minister wanted to make a name for himself. He wanted to be a minister of finance, known as the no tax increase minister. And that popularity will obviously see him through for a while. But, corporate tax is set to reduce. But if corporate tax increases, then certainly there's more money available to service the social network. During apartheid, the tax rate for corporates were 50%, and now it is 26%. So the minister, this is his maiden speech. He wanted to be popular, but we hope that in the next budget speech in 6 months' time, that he will relook at increasing taxes for the corporate sector, for the private sector. They have been given a windfall over the 27 years, and that is why the poor are still suffering. That's why there's no jobs, and that's why there is so much poverty and inequality, because the private sector is the favorite of government.
Mr. Mohammad Khanif Hendricks, the leader of Al Jama, ending that conversation now. I'm going to bring in the DA's finance spokesperson, Dr. Dion George. Your party was saying SONA was taken out of the DA's policies. Is the budget taken out of the DA's policies?
No, not entirely. We did like the narrative that the minister was offering. He was talking the right direction, but he was overly cautious. He certainly didn't address the elephant in the room, and that big elephant is obviously the public sector wage bill. We know that politically he's unable to maneuver, and that is why he can't do that. And that's why also he's not able to take the bold steps to tackle the debt crisis, because that public sector wage bill is too high. We're seeing an extra 20 billion rand that was unbudgeted for. So that political space is not conducive for him. So we really much liked what the president said in terms of business is the entity that's going to generate jobs. But we never saw that in the budget. Yes, the corporate tax rate reducing by 1% is very good. We support that. That the market's already factored in. But he was completely silent on tax incentives for small businesses. So for example, yes, you can make profit and you can get relief on your tax, but there needs to be a far stronger incentivization for small, medium, micro enterprises. And he was completely silent on that. He could have given tax holidays. He could have also reduced the tax hurdle for people who are trying to save, so we can get more domestic savings and then get more investment in the economy. He was completely silent on that as well. And he also should have cut the fuel levy, left it the same. We're pleased about that, but he should have cut it. He would have had a lot more fiscal space if he had tackled that elephant. Also, he was basically silent on the state-owned enterprises. Although he's talking about the right things, he's not taking the knife to those, and he needs to do that. Also, we don't know what's going to happen with a super state-owned enterprise that's now going to manage all the bankrupt state-owned enterprise, which is frankly a crazy idea. So I do think it was an opportunity lost, although we do believe that the narrative is the right one. So he is speaking in the right way. He now needs to walk the right way. He needs to put the money where the president's mouth is.
In his medium-term budget policy statement, he mentioned this issue of a two-pot system for people being able to access pension funds. As the DA, do you support that particular move?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it was part of the DA suggestions that you should be able to take a pension-backed loan, for example, obviously supported by the trustees, and that you should be able to access your pension early. So it was, in fact, one of the DA's ideas. So we are very pleased that this has been incorporated. Obviously, the detail of how it will be managed, because we do want to encourage people to save for retirement, but we know the dire circumstances. So we do support that, yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dion George, the spokesperson on finance for the Democratic Alliance. For more reaction, we're going to cross back to you, Nombu Siziba.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. I'm joined by Baba Willie Madisha. He's from COPE. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Just give us your overall reaction to the Finance Minister's speech.
Thank you very much. For the past 27 years, I must say that this is the worst speech that I've ever heard in South Africa. I had thought that he would give us a very clear economic capacity program, but he has not. In actual fact, as you know, more than 65% of the youth in South Africa are not working. Now, that is not the only part. The poverty rate is extremely high. There is a very serious problem. South Africa loans borrows from beyond our seas about 2.5 billion rand on a daily basis. We are not hearing anything from him how this is going to be dealt with. The 1.5 trillion rand which has gone to AIC GOOD problem, which is being dealt with, which is not being addressed properly, which was supposed to give the people of South Africa almost that which they're supposed to get over a period of 5 years, is not being addressed. I thought he would address all those things, but he has not. And this is the most useless speech that I've ever heard.
So this speech gave you no confidence whatsoever to help rejuvenate our economy?
No, nothing at all. In actual fact, what he says is that he'll come back in October, which means between now and October, there is nothing altogether that will be happening. People will go on and die. People will go on not get any jobs. People will not go to school. Everything will have collapsed. I'm saying at the universities, children will not go there. Everywhere, there is nothing altogether. This is extremely disappointing. And I want to say that this government of this ANC has done nothing altogether. We are extremely disappointed.
Well, we've heard you, Mr. Madisha. Thank you very much for your time. Let me hand over now to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
Thank you once again, Nompu. Of course, the political parties will have an opportunity to debate the finance minister's speech next week comprehensively. But for short reactions now, I'm joined by the MP from the African Independent Congress, Mahlubanzi Machafta. As the AIC, do you accept that the minister's speech is taking South Africa in the right direction?
Honestly, there is less said about the challenges that South Africa is facing. For instance, there is nothing new that the minister has said that the people of South Africa didn't expect. For instance, the people already knew that there should be no changes in tax. There should be no increase in tax given the situation that South Africa has been through the past 2 years. The coronavirus, the violence that we have seen, everything that were challenging to the economy of the country. Less is said by the minister concerning the education that is, for instance, now facing challenges, that is still busy struggling to take the people back to school. We are expecting, we are, for instance, now experiencing some provinces that are having problems with a textbook and whatsoever. There is less said by the minister to do changes on those. Also, our health system in South Africa is having a problem, but less has been said by the minister to fund that department so that it is able to meet the challenges that it is facing. Honestly, really, there is nothing that the minister has said or has given the people of South Africa a hope that the South Africa will change soon.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Mahlubanzi Machafta. From the AIC, I'm going to ask the Secretary General of the Good Party, Mr. Brett Herron, to give us his perspective on this finance minister's speech. Was there anything good about this budget speech?
I think that South Africans can take some encouragement from the overall direction of the speech, the commitment to some real structural reforms, the emphasis by the finance minister that we need greater economic growth, and the low growth pathway that had been projected was not an acceptable pathway, and we've been saying ourselves that we need at least 3% growth if we're going to create the jobs. The commitment to no new taxes, the stabilization of the fuel levy, the commitment to reviewing the fuel levy and the fuel pricing of fuel in future. I think those are things that we can be encouraged by. The emphasis, the deep emphasis on infrastructure and the investment in infrastructure and the jobs that infrastructure investment can create. We have a jobs crisis in South Africa. The president last week made a commitment to addressing the jobs crisis, and we saw some of that come through in the speech with both the tax incentive for young unemployed people, plus the presidential employment program. So there's a lot of good stuff that came through. I think the disappointment is the failure to deal with the social security that we need. The increases are encouraging, but the social distress relief grant cannot be the grant that supports people who are unable to earn an income in an environment that's not creating jobs. So the failure to finally give some clarity on the future of a basic income grant, I think, is the great disappointment. disappointment of the speech.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Brett Herron, the Secretary General of the Good Party. For more reaction, we'll cross back to you now, Nompu.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. And I'm joined now by Aaron Motsoaledi. He's the Minister of Home Affairs. Thank you very much, sir. No doubt you were very happy with the speech. Tell us your views.
Yes, I'm quite happy. You are aware that we've been talking for a long time about the rebuilding of our border posts, especially the 6 most busiest border posts in the country, into something called one-stop border post, which needs massive, and I must repeat, massive infrastructural injection at those border posts, so that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement can be implemented very well, but so that we also stop counterfeiting of goods, we stop the trafficking of women and children, but we also stop people just going through the borders illegally, bribing and all that. And cross-border crimes are going to reduce, because we are going to put a very sophisticated equipment at the borders, and that's why we are so happy.
Now, you say that, but at the end of the day, you can have fancy infrastructure, but you need good people. And part of the reason sometimes people are alive to being bribed is because they're not paid enough. And there's always the issue about the pay of people in the public service.
Well, when you don't have infrastructure, it increases the possibility of those who are rogue elements to start stealing very easily, because there's no infrastructure to help you. For instance, at the moment, how do you search trucks? You depend on people. But when we do one-stop border post, we are going to put very sophisticated equipment such that any truck that passes through does not depend on human beings, but we can see what is inside there. Be it alcohol, be it equipment, stolen cars, money, alcohol, even cigarettes. There is equipment to peep in without touching the truck, just by it driving through. So that those who are corrupt will always be there, by the way, but they will have a lesser chance of doing their corruption. At the moment, with the infrastructure that is there, it's very easy to do this type of corruption.
Ntate, thank you very much for your time. Let's hand over now to Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Nompu. We're going to go straight to the EFF Deputy President, Mr. Floyd Shibambu. Firstly, coming into this budget speech, you were talking about the need for government to ensure that there's job creation. Does this speech take us to that trajectory?
No, look, the budget that was presented today, one, is underwhelming, but also does not have details on how we're going to do things differently, particularly in relation to the creation of jobs. There's just like monies which traditionally get allocated to the public service for expanded public works programs, but there is nothing new that inspires hope that we're going to give meaningful jobs to the more than 11 million people that are unemployed. But one thing that is markedly different about this budget is the fact that the debt servicing cost of the state are for the first time the highest expenditure item. So the state is going to spend more than 310 billion rands paying interests of loans that have been accumulated from different institutions domestically and globally. It is the first time since 1994 that as an expenditure item, the debt service cost is above all other expenditures. And that is a worrying factor, and one of the things that we are raising today as part of the protest action of the EFF, where we say that what is the basis of South Africa continuing to take loans from the World Bank and the IMF when already you are in a very deep debt situation of more than 4.3 trillion rands, which is like almost approaching 100% of the GDP of South Africa is owed to different institutions. And that is the issues that we're raising here, and we're going to be raising with National Treasury, that the manner in which the fiscus is being handled is not sustainable. It is not going to inspire economic growth, but the manner in which we handle borrowing as well, it's not sustainable, it's very problematic. Let's maybe go and look at what is happening in Tanzania, in Angola, in Ethiopia, where borrowing of resources externally is directed to specific projects, railway projects, power stations, much more specifically. Not just to borrow money in order to throw it into a bottomless national revenue pit, which doesn't even change things meaningfully. So there has to be a different way, or there must be a rethinking of how we accumulate these debts, which are now overwhelming the state. By the manner in which it's going, we're most likely going to end up paying more than half, like R1 trillion into debt services in the foreseeable future within the current medium-term expenditure framework, and that is problematic, and we are not inspired at all, and the people of South Africa must never be inspired by this budget because it is not giving any hope to the people of South Africa.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Floyd Shibambu, the Deputy President of the Economic Freedom Fighters. Nombu, I believe you're standing by.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Yes, I am joined by the man of the hour, the man of the day, that is Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, just to speak to us a little bit about some of the rationale behind the budget. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Now, of course, you decided not to raise personal income tax. You decided also not to raise the road levy and the fuel levy, pardon me, and also the road accident fund levy. This is great relief for South Africans who are already grappling, but what was the rationale behind that decision?
Let me just say a couple of things. We've had a good revenue arising from commodity prices. Secondly, South Africans have had difficult times. If I've got to give revenue, I had to put this revenue into support the South Africans and give them space to have money in their pockets by not increasing taxes.
Indeed. So, of course, you also mentioned this 15 billion rand that will go towards the SME loan guarantee scheme, which is great for small businesses. How is that going to be effected, and most importantly, when? And why such a relatively small quantum, given the impact that SMEs should have on the economy?
There's another 5 billion. The total quantum is 20 billion. Mind you, it's an experimental thing this year. If you can see a massive take-up and a massive improvement in business, we'll put more.
Now, you threatened in the midterm budget last year to get tough with SOEs, and you've pretty much outlined that in today's budget. But just give us the mechanics of how it's going to be worked out, which SOEs survive and which don't.
What I've said, but tough love, you will see in this budget, other than Eskom, I've not made provision for anyone. I've then said anybody will queue and will be treated on its merits. They will have to demonstrate capabilities and a willingness to transform and a willingness to take the institution to self-sufficiency. They must give me that road trajectory before I can listen.
Okay. So one of the things that you've also stated is that National Treasury is hoping to reach a primary surplus by the fiscal year 2023 to 2024.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just around the corner.
Yeah.
How so?
Yes.
How so?
Yeah, look, we see the projection in revenues as a result of the performance of the economy. For instance, we've revised the economic growth from 1.8 to 2.1, which means that growth is likely to give us some more revenue, which we can be able to sustain the economy growing, the fiscals going forward.
Indeed. But you know, it's interesting that part of the reason why you've done well in the kitty this time around has been largely because of the mining sector and the commodity boom. But that doesn't necessarily translate to how the general broader economy has done.
If you look at the speech, there were also performance in manufacturing and other sectors, but largely the bigger portion was for mining, which means the economy as a whole is beginning to tick up. That's why we could see more increase on personal income tax, better revenue on VAT. So all of that combined, it reflects that it's an impact of the economy
recovery. Now, the important thing, of course, is infrastructure, and basically that is the linchpin of the President Ramaphosa's whole kind of existence or policy, right? And you've talked about applying some 17 billion rand over the medium-term expenditure framework over the next 3 years or so. But of course, that's working in partnership with the private sector. Just elaborate for us a little bit on how that's going to work.
Let me just say, first and foremost, we're sitting state-owned enterprises and in government with an amount of about 812 billion rand for infrastructure. Now, we're saying in addition to that, we're bringing the private sector. That 17 billion is an amount we're going to be using to do a couple of things. First, to generate pipeline and bring in private sector to invest.
And then what about the issue of corruption? You know, we've had the state capture report come out. South Africans are still very worried about the fact that people put their hands in the kitty who shouldn't. And money that's allocated to really important strategic projects doesn't get spent as it should. Are the apparatus in place to ensure that all these wonderful plans that you have, with all these figures that you've attached to them, are actually delivered?
First, I've said that we will assist the corruption fighting institutions. We'll put money into them to deal with everybody who's affected. They must not say they don't have the resources. They must deal with that. That's the first point. But moving forward, we're building systems where we'll make sure that we evaluate every project for value for money. That's another point that I've said there.
Minister, over the medium term, can we afford the basic income grant?
Look, it depends at what level, right? Depends at what level and what do we rationalize. If you look at all of these programs that were extended public works, community-based projects, all of these projects, if you combine them, they can give you a figure. I'm not saying we can afford, but already we're putting money in the hands of people, but in an uncoordinated way.
Indeed. And then lastly, the EFF is here. They are protesting about the way that government raises funds. You raise funds in different ways as National Treasury. And one of the ways is to go to international institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. They say that these institutions actually help to mold your policy and you lose your sovereignty to a certain degree. Please remind South Africans of why it's a policy to approach these institutions as a way of raising funds.
Yeah, let me just say, this year, the year that we're finishing, we're supposed to raise 630 billion rand. Right? 630 billion rand. In the next year, we'll raise 484 billion rand because we've reduced the deficit substantially. Now, when you do that, all of those people you're borrowing money from will have their own conditions. So the 11 billion out of 630 is nothing, right? Out of 630 billion. So that's the first point. The second point, the World Bank has put on its website the agreement. There are no conditionalities which impact on our sovereignty. It's an ideology. Treasury officials that are working there are not politicians. What they are looking for is money that can sustain our debt strategy. That is how cheap they can be able to borrow. If they get money cheap from the World Bank, they'll get it.
And just speaking to that, the last thing, you have indicated that you're going to be bringing down the level of debt that you're going to be taking. That you're going to be taking out less debt. So your borrowing requirement is coming down this year and next year. Does that mean that you're well on track to achieving the goals that you want to in terms of our debt to GDP ratio?
Yes. You can see at the end we're ending up with a 75% debt to GDP ratio. That's what we want, which we think is a sustainable level of debt.
Super. Thank you very much, Minister. We're going to leave it there.
Thank you.
That was the Finance Minister, Godongwana, speaking to us here at SABC. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Bulelani Philip.
Thank you so much, Nompu. Talking to me now is Mr. Ahmed Imam Sheikh from the NFP. Mr. Sheikh, the announcement made by the minister regarding the social safety net, are you happy as the NFP?
Very much so, yes indeed. Whilst we appreciate that, the 350 rand social distress grant is not enough, but I think it's going to go a long way. The fact that it has now been extended, which is going to cost us about 46 billion rand, we welcome that. We also welcome all the tax relief that he has given. We also welcome the fact that there's been no increases in the fuel levy, in the road accident fund relief. We also welcome the fact that the minister has, when it came to the pay-as-you-earn taxes, he's extended the threshold, which is important. So what it simply means is there's more money in the pockets of people, and if there's more money, they have more money to spend. That can boost economic growth. However, our concern is a lot of money has been allocated to infrastructure development. He's talking about 800 some odd billion rand over the medium term, and we know that we do not have the capacity to be able to spend this money in the country. In fact, I think the last financial year in the infrastructure, there was only about 15 billion rand that was spent. So that's where we've got the problem, that while the programs are good, the plans are good, the implementation of this is a serious problem. And more importantly, is the issue of the debt service cost. Now, debt service cost, or particularly which is running into 300 and some odd billion rand, and our debt is going to go now to about 5 trillion rand, 5.4 trillion rand. The question is, when are we going to stop borrowing money, taking into the factor into consideration, and that is that you lose in this country approximately 300 billion rand when you don't get value for money. But fortunately, the minister today has pronounced on that matter that measures are going to be put in place, particularly on the issue of procurement, to ensure that we do get value for money, starting right from local government level. And if that is the case, then I can assure you that we do not need to borrow. In South Africa, the problem is not the availability of the resources, it's the problem of how do you spend it. Do you have the capacity to spend it? If you spend it, I promise you economic growth in South Africa will boost, as a matter of urgency. The problem we got is this, that we don't have that capacity, and that's what we need to deal with. Secondly, deal with the issue of looting and corruption right from the local government level, you'd be able to have enough resources in this country.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed Imam Sheikh from the National Freedom Party. For more reaction, we cross now to Nompu Siziba.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. I'm joined now by the Minister of Justice and Correctional Services, Ronald Lamola. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Your thoughts around the budget, particularly as it pertains to your portfolio. One of the things that people are worried about is justice in South Africa, and whether the infrastructure in our system is sufficient for us to get the justice we all deserve.
No, thank you. I think from our side, we welcome the budget, and as you have heard the minister, he has increased our budget with about 1.1 billion, which is a welcomed intervention, because it will help us with our modernization program, and also the challenges of the NPA in terms of resources, and also for the NPA and the whole system to be able to respond to the Zondo Commission's recommendations.
It does. It does seem like 1.1 billion rand in the scheme of things does seem quite small, especially when we look at the NPA and, frankly, its inability to bring people to book over the last number of years.
Yeah, it is a step in the right direction. Because it will enable the NPA to plan for the next 3 years, and also the department itself to also plan for the next 3 years, and also to ensure that the capability in our court infrastructure is also responsive in terms of the modern technology, the CCTV camera, the recording machines, and all that we may need for the courts to function optimally. And that will respond to the crime challenges that the country is facing. And it is also welcome that he also spoke about the South African Police Service. So if you capacitate the South African Police Service and also capacitate the NPA, it will have that relay effect to respond to the criminal challenge the country is facing.
Thanks very much, Minister. I'm going to hand over now to Bulelani.
Thank you so much, Nompu. Joining me now is the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee, Mr. Sfiso Buthelezi. Firstly, before I ask you about your reaction to the minister's speech, 3 bills were presented here as part of the finance minister's speech. What are those bills, and how are you, as the Appropriations Committee, together with the Finance Committee, Joint Finance Committee, is going to take them forward?
Okay, good afternoon, and good afternoon to our viewers. There's an appropriation bill. Okay, let me put them in order, because firstly there's going to be a fiscal framework, which is what the Committee of Finance deals with, right? Which will say that's how much we are going to spend, this is the tax that we are going to have, this is the debt that we are going to have. That comes under the Standing Committee on Finance, which is Joma Swanganyi's committee. And then immediately Parliament approves that. Then the Standing Committee on Appropriations kicks in. We start with what we call the Division of Revenue Bill, which is a bill which deals with the allocation of money amongst the national government, the provincial government, and the local government. Then you distribute that money, and those levels of government, the provincial and local government, then they divide that, what goes to them, right? And then once we are done with the Division of Revenue Bill, it goes to Parliament, it gets debated and is passed, right? It then goes to the NCOP. But then what we do from our side, then the appropriation bills come in. What is the appropriation bill? The appropriation bill is the bill which then allocates money to the different departments in government, different votes. Then that's what the appropriation bill does. So we look at each and every of those departments, what the Minister of Finance has allocated to them. Perhaps what's important here is that what we are having today, the budget presented by the Minister of Finance, it's a proposal to Parliament. It's a proposal to Parliament, and that money can't be used until Parliament, both houses, approve what has been. Then it's only after then that the executive can start spending. So so what we are asking, what is our position as far as this proposal? Which is
Let me take you to the Division of Revenue Bill, which is the part that you're responsible for. The minister saying about 157 municipalities are dysfunctional, and there has been this ongoing call of the review of the Division of Revenue, particularly which is actually not advantageous to municipalities. As the Appropriations Committee, in your deliberations, have you been supportive in terms of increasing their revenue?
But if you look at today's minister's budget speech, he has already spoken about the additional money that he is taking there. So it's an ongoing discussion, and as you know, there's always a constraint when resources of the resources. So, but if you look at today's budget, he has already put some addition. Why? When it comes to the local government, remember that local government has also a revenue-raising capacity. They are allowed by the legislation that they can raise their own revenue. Me and you pay rates there. We pay electricity. People pay for their businesses, and so on and so forth. So that's why you find that they don't get all their money from the national revenue.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Sfiso Buthelezi, the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee. Wishing him the best of luck in their deliberations with the Finance Minister tomorrow. Nompu, it's back to you.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Now I'm joined by Edward Keswetter. He's the SARS Commissioner. Thanks very much for joining us. I think us in the financial business world, in the financial journalism world, we've been very unfair to you. We've said, oh, it's just because of the higher commodity prices that SARS has managed to bring in more revenue. How much of a fine-tuning of your apparatus has been part of the reason for improved revenue uptake?
Thank you for that question, and also for the acknowledgement. You know, our broad estimate at the moment, which we can underpin by the activities that we do, is that the current revenue overperformance, about a third of that comes from the economic boom, particularly in the commodity cycle. and a few other factors that have lifted the economy higher than expected, and 2/3 will come from our SARS efforts. The assumption that there is a direct correlation between the economy and the revenue could only be based if we had 100% compliance, and that's not the case. And so the revenue that is due to the state, we still have to do work, and it's phone calls, it's SMSs, it's conducting investigations. To give you an idea, just this year, we have done enough work to hand over 220 solid cases to the NPA to prosecute, including, by the way, PPE cases. And I'm happy to tell you that 113 of those cases have been successfully prosecuted, including 11 PPE cases. Another example that I could share with you is that we have conducted 650 complex investigations of tax crime, corruption, stuff that you hear at the Zondo report, at the Zondo Commission. And just those investigations have yielded additional revenue of over 6 billion rand.
Yeah.
And so I can list you specific activities that SARS does, which if not done, would mean that that revenue is still outside of the fold.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that we have noticed, out in real life or whatever, in the real world, is you advertising for more staff to capacitate SARS, especially in the area of newer skills, data analysts and all that kind of thing. How are you doing in that regard? Has it been difficult, given that these are new skills?
It's tough, because these are, first of all, they're future-oriented skills, and there's a scarcity for it. And to some extent, we have to accept that SARS may not necessarily be the preferred employer for some of these skills. They are highly sought after, and we compete with the financial sector and other industries for these skills. I am happy to say, though, that we have made steady progress to begin to enhance our data analytics and data science skill, and also to increase and expand our own technology innovation capability. I've just made an appointment of a very senior executive who will work in my office to help the strategic reformulation of our modernization journey, which is a highly complex. In the end, Nampu, I normally say SARS is a technology company that dabbles in tax.
Now, we know that you guys are celebrating your quarter-of-a-century birthday. I'll give you a minute to just speak to the significance of SARS in our new dispensation.
Well, democracy is an idea until you have a number of criteria that you can fulfill or meet. The first is you need a capable state. And we know that that's a journey that we are still on. We cannot claim victory that as a state we are fully capable. But we are making progress. Secondly, you need to fund that democracy. And for us, what inspires us is knowing that the work we do, the revenue we collect, has the potential to transform the lives of South Africans. And I can tell you that in our 25th year, in the 24 years rather, this is the 25th year, in the 24 years behind us, since its creation, SARS has collected over 16 trillion. And the minister has just announced that this year he sets us a target of another 1.547 trillion, which means that the net revenue collection of SARS in its 25 years, as its contribution to our democracy, is almost 18 trillion. That's 1/8 with 12 zeros. It's a big number.
That's a big number.
And so for us, that is really the transformative impact of SARS, and the impact it has. I see the face of an old granny that benefits from the pension fund, of a young child capable of going to a good school. You and I able to perform the activities that we need to do, knowing that the state has provided for it. Now, we can criticize and say we have a long way to go, but we also have to acknowledge we have already come far.
Commissioner, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. As always, Commissioner Edward Kiswitter of SARS. Let's cross over to Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Nompu. For more reaction, we're going to be talking to Labour, COSATU's parliamentary coordinator, Matthew Parks. The minister announcing a marginal increase in the wage bill to over 600 billion. What does that say with regards to the working relationship? Because you've in the past had frictions around the implementations of agreements.
Sure, look, I think we welcome the minister's announcement that they will be engaging in the Public Service Bargaining Council. That's what the trade unions and COSATU have been calling for the past few years, for government simply to respect collective bargaining. There is some ongoing discussions taking place. We need to give space for it to conclude. So that's positive. In the budget, the government has put aside projected 2.1% increase in the wage bill for the next 3 years each year. So that one would have to reject because it'll be below inflation. Inflation is about 4.5%. So for us, the bottom line is you can't give public servants or any other worker below inflation. You have to protect them from inflation. But it's, I think the critical thing is he says he wants to engage, and that's where we hope we will find each other.
The President, in his State of the Nation address, said that business is responsible for creating jobs. What do you make of that statement? Is it a threat on workers' rights?
Look, business has a role to play, but government also has a critical role. Government is one which passes laws to enable investments. Government runs through the SOEs, electricity, water, roads, passenger rail, freight rail, the ports. It runs the police and all the infrastructure. So government has to play a role, has to play a leadership role. Government is the largest procurer of goods in the country, so it can play a key role in ramping up local manufacturing jobs. Of course, the private sector must play a role. We don't expect government to employ all 30 million adults, but government has to lead from the front. It cannot outsource its leadership role. Workers elected it based upon a manifesto to create jobs, to reduce unemployment. If we leave things simply to the private sector, we'll continue as is, with an economy in a deep recession, an unemployment rate of 46%. So there's a need for a complementary role. So that's why we called for the Presidential Employment Program to be created, to be ramped up. It has been. We think it needs to be further expanded. Government also has to provide social relief to the people who are unemployed, who have no source of income. So there's a complementary roles we need to play, but it can't be outsourced to the private sector at all. Private sector is about providing goods, providing profit, etc. It's not about creating jobs. Government has to help nudge it in the correct direction.
All right, thank you so much. Matthew Parks is the parliamentary coordinator for COSATU. For more reaction, we cross back to Nombu.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. Well, I'm joined by the Minister in the Presidency, Mondli Gungumele. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Your reaction to the budget speech?
A brilliant flow from the SONA in terms of ensuring that we contribute resources to security and corruption. We contribute resources to unleashing the economy in the area of structural reforms. The minister spoke to rail, ports, telecommunication. Significant contribution to jobs, no less than 76 billion to job creation. Presidential stimulus alone about 18 billion. Remember last year it was 11 billion, it created no less than 800,000 jobs. We hope it will go beyond 1 million now. 60% there is young people. Tax incentive of no less than 1,005 per one person employed. That's a huge contribution. 5.2 billion tax relief, and a lot of stuff that came out there. And again, the president spoke about consensus. The minister commits to sit down with the labor to discuss remuneration,
yes,
and so on. It's a balanced budget. It flows from the President's State of the Nation address.
Just to the issue that the President spoke about at SONA, about government not being the creators of jobs, but basically an institution that should create a conducive environment for the private sector to create jobs. You talk about the presidential stimulus package and the 800,000 jobs or job opportunities created.
And 76 billion for job creation.
But how sustainable are those jobs, those 800,000 jobs, and the opportunities that will come, that will flow thereafter when they're done in those job opportunities?
Those jobs, it's an opportunity, especially for young people who are desperate, who want to have an income, protects their self-dignity. It gives them opportunity to training. Those various jobs, they expose them to different skills, what to call development, and at the same time to give some minimum income. And having said to you, it's just young people, remember the money they actually get as an income it goes to the economy also. Having said that, I'm also want to explain this thing of the president saying government doesn't create jobs. I think maybe the biggest challenge is that is people interpret it out of context. Because even on the day he was saying it, he said 80% is private sector, 20% is government. Even in the same speech, he says 800,000 jobs have been created by government. You can't interpret that then absolutely. You've got to interpret it from context. My understanding of the context is that currently government has got limited funds. A lot of money is in the private sector. A lot of your resources better go in creating those concessions by infrastructure. You heard how much money is being deployed in infrastructure. Yeah. Government infrastructure, telecommunication, opening up flow of article of goods. Those are the main areas where government deploys money, but not that government is not great. You can only reach that conclusion if you make an absolute interpretation.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time. That was the Minister in the Presidency, Mondli Gugumbele. Well, of course, now I'm going to be speaking on Zoom or via Zoom with Mandla Isaacs. He's an economist. Thank you very much, Mandla, for joining us. Just give us your overall interpretation of the budget. Do you think that it was a fairly good budget, especially given that taxes were not raised, particularly income tax?
Thank you. I think it was a good budget. It's been in continuation with the broad trend that Treasury has been doing over the last few years, which is to say we need to get spending under control and focus on reforms which can grow the economy. Taxes were not raised. I was not expecting them to be raised. We've basically reached the limits of how much that you can tax individuals through personal income tax and corporate tax, and of course VAT. Treasury is very reluctant to raise that. There's very little that you can do at that point without damaging the economy and of course creating huge political blowback from citizens and the electorate.
So, Mandla, just in terms of the infrastructure spend that government is going to apply, talking about 17 billion rand over the medium term, obviously they would want to party with the private sector, maybe to multiply that sum. Just tell us your thoughts around that. Is that encouraging?
It is. We know that infrastructure is a huge focus area for the president. Infrastructure is quite critical. We've had backlogs in telecommunications, digital infrastructure. We know that, rail infrastructure is critical to our exports. It raises the cost of our manufactured goods. It's created constraints even on our commodities. Even in the midst of this boom, we've been constrained in terms of the amount of coal that we're able to get down that Richards Bay corridor and out of that port because of limitations on the rail infrastructure. So there's huge scope there. The government has made clear that it does not have the funds to kind of be the lead investor in infrastructure. So what it's trying to do is package projects in the right way, focus on streamlining those approval processes to get infrastructure out the door. You saw a renewed focus on PPPs to smooth the way in which government's able to negotiate, finalize, and increase the speed and rate at which PPPs are agreed so that you can maximize that private sector investment. The government's essentially trying to play an enabling role, put in money in very targeting ways that can unlock more private sector money and simply reform and unlock the process so that you make it much easier to conclude infrastructure projects and get that investment out the door. We know there's a lot of interest in renewable energy, in IPPs, which can happen if government enables that correctly. There's interest in the transport infrastructure. And of course, the telecommunications infrastructure, and we're all waiting for that auction of spectrum, which has been waiting for years, which will immediately unlock 20 or 30 billion rand of investment in new telecoms infrastructure. So that's a huge opportunity for the country.
Yeah, Mandla, you do seem to be speaking in quite positive tones. Just tell us, lastly, is this budget a ratings positive budget?
I think it will be. I think the ratings agencies will see it as positive. The big issue, the big question was, what is government going to do with that 180-odd billion rand windfall in commodity revenue? And I think government made a good decision to use some of it to fund the COVID grant extension by a year, some of it to fund provincial education and health, to make do on the impact for the public wage cash component that hit those provincial budgets quite hard. But then the bulk of that was used to manage debt and bring forward that primary budget surplus into a year earlier, and I think 2023. So I think the ratings agencies will look on that positively and say that government did hold the line and is committing to stabilizing the debt trajectory. But of course, they will be keeping an eye on those risks around SOEs, the public sector wage bill, as well as the political risks around further calls for a basic income grant. But I think it's slightly positive for now from a ratings and credibility perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Mandla, for your time and insights there. Mandla Isaacs is an economist. So now I'm joined by another economist, that is Kim Silberman. She's from RMB and she's here to join us. Thanks very much, Kim, for your time. Presumably, I mean, the minister, in terms of the whole public sector wage agreement story, the minister mentioned that there's going to be a summit between government and Labour towards the end of March. How significant is that summit going to be in terms of the government being able to ensure it keeps its fiscal house in order?
Well, I think it's really positive that government is engaging with Labour, because I think, that kind of discussion really broke down over the last few fiscal years, where I think it was very difficult for Labour to get an audience with government. And I think going forward, if you want to contain costs, you need to at least start having a conversation.
Do you think government got the balance right? I mean, earlier we were talking, do you think government got the balance right, given its windfall of some, additional 180 billion rand over the expectation in February of last year? Do you think it managed to balance everything out in terms of where it applied all that surplus?
Well, it was a bit different from what I'd expected in terms of expenditure. The budget shows about 30 billion more additional expenditure, and we're funding that from increasing debt offshore. So we're borrowing more money offshore to increase spending. And I suppose we need to decide, are we spending on the right things? And I think from what I can see, the strategy of Treasury has been, instead of extending the COVID grant for 2 years, they've increased the things that we were talking about before, the spending on infrastructure and health and education, and all the things we said were going to be very difficult to cut and have a huge impact on service delivery. So I think that that's a positive move, because essentially you're saying, well, we're not going to spend on the COVID grant, but we are increasing our spending on things that can actually increase our potential GDP growth. So I think the return back to spending on infrastructure is important. I just wonder if we can get away with not extending the COVID grant. I'm a bit skeptical about that.
We have to wait and see.
Yes.
And then, of course, corporate tax has been brought down by 1 percentage point to 27%.
Yeah.
In the scheme of things, is that just a gesture, or is it a material thing?
Yeah, apparently it's just a gesture, because it's being compensated for elsewhere in terms of the way that you capitalize debt, I think. I'm not being a corporate expert, but they've actually increased other tax measures on corporates, so it evens it out. So essentially, they're still taxing corporates, I think, at the same rate.
Kim, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time and spending some of your time with us. Kim Silberman, she's an economist at RMB. And of course, it's been a very interesting budget. Some people are for it. You heard Willie Madisha, for example, from COPE, definitely against it, says it's not an inspiring budget at all. But of course, it's always very difficult to weigh everything up and please everybody. We're going to now just hand over, if I can be advised. Okay, we are...
At Telkom Business, when we say we'll beat any fixed line voice or internet quote, we mean it with added value. Make sure you have the tools to seal the deal. We're on it.